The knife slipped from Olivia's trembling fingers and clattered against the exposed roots of the cottonwood tree. Her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs as she spun around to face the massive figure emerging from the forest shadows. The year was 1876, and she had traveled all the way to the rugged wilderness outside Hachita, New Mexico territory, seeking solitude to carve her initials into this ancient tree, never expecting to encounter another living soul this far from civilization, especially not a mountain man whose shoulders seemed broader than the doorway of her father's mercantile back in Santa Fe. He stood there watching her, his long dark hair touching his shoulders, streaked with hints of copper from endless days under the southwestern sun. His muscular frame was draped in buckskin and worn denim, and his eyes, the color of rich honey, held an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. She could see the definition of his arms even through his shirt, the way his chest rose and fell with each measured breath, and despite her fear, something else flickered to life inside her chest. "Did not mean to startle you, miss," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate through the desert air. "Name is Daniel Yates. I have been tracking a wounded elk through these parts and heard the sound of your knife against that bark." Olivia pressed her hand against her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. "Olivia Dalton," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I apologize if I am trespassing on your land. This land belongs to no one but God and the creatures who walk it," Daniel said, stepping closer. His movements were careful, measured, as though he understood the effect his size and sudden appearance had on her. Though most folks stay clear of these woods, dangerous for a woman alone, she bristled at that, lifting her chin despite the truth in his words. "I can handle myself, Mr. Yates. I have been traveling these territories for 3 weeks now." His eyebrows rose slightly, and something that might have been respect flickered across his rugged features. He was perhaps 28 or 29, she guessed, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years living in harsh conditions. She was 22 herself, old enough to know her own mind but young enough that her family still tried to dictate her future, which was precisely why she had fled Santa Fe in the first place. Daniel's gaze drifted to the tree behind her, where she had carved the letters OD into the pale bark beneath the rough outer layer. "Marking your territory," heat flooded her cheeks. "Something like that. I wanted to leave proof that I was here, that I existed in this moment. Back in Santa Fe, my father has arranged for me to marry Walter Hutchinson, a banker twice my age who treats women like property to be acquired. I ran before the wedding could take place. This tree, these initials, they are a declaration of my freedom." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she was not sure why she felt compelled to confess such things to this stranger. Perhaps it was the isolation of the wilderness, or perhaps it was the way he looked at her, not with judgment but with understanding. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then he bent down and retrieved her fallen knife, wiping the blade on his pants before extending it to her handle first. When she took it, their fingers brushed, and she felt a shock of warmth travel up her arm. He reached into his belt and pulled out his own knife, larger and more worn than hers, the handle wrapped in leather that had been shaped by years of use. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the tree. She nodded, curiosity overcoming her wariness. She watched as he positioned himself beside where she had carved her initials, his powerful arms flexing as he worked the blade into the bark with practiced efficiency. The muscles in his forearms corded and released with each careful stroke, and she found herself mesmerized by the controlled strength in his movements. Within minutes, he had carved DY beside her OD, the letters matching in size and depth. "There," he said, stepping back to examine his work. Now you are not alone in your declaration. Olivia stared at the initials, something fierce and unnamed swelling in her chest. But you do not even know me, Mr. Yates. Why would you tie your mark to mine? He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her feel as though he could see straight through to her soul. Because I understand what it means to run from a life that does not fit. I was supposed to take over my father's shipping business in Boston, marry a society woman, spend my days behind a desk counting money and attending dinner parties. Instead, I came west 8 years ago and never looked back. These mountains, this wilderness, it is where I belong. And any woman brave enough to flee an unwanted marriage and carve her name into a tree in the middle of nowhere deserves to have someone stand beside her, even if only an oak and bark. Before she could respond, he placed his large hand against the tree, covering both sets of initials. I make you a promise, Olivia Dalton. While you are in this territory, you will not face whatever comes alone. If you need help, if you need protection, if you need anything at all, you find me. I have a cabin about 3 miles north of here, up in the foothills. Anyone in Hatcheta can tell you how to find Daniel Yates. Why? The question came out as barely more than a whisper. Why would you make such a promise to a stranger? A slow smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges and revealing a warmth that made her heart skip. Maybe because the moment I saw you standing here, knife in hand, declaring your independence to the universe, I recognized something in you that I have been searching for without even knowing it. Or maybe I am just a fool mountain man who believes in signs and fate. Either way, the promise stands. The sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, painting the desert landscape in shades of orange and gold. Olivia realized she needed to return to the small boarding house in Hatcheta, where she had taken a room, but her feet seemed reluctant to move away from this man and this moment. I should go, she said finally, but thank you, Mr. Yates, for the promise and for making me feel less alone. Daniel, he corrected gently. If our initials are carved together in that tree, I reckon we can use our given names. Daniel, she repeated, liking the way it felt on her tongue. I am Olivia. I know, he said, and there was something in his voice that made her shiver despite the warm evening air. Safe travels back to town, Olivia, and remember what I said. She nodded and turned to leave, but after a few steps she glanced back. He was still standing by the tree, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. She raised her hand in a small wave, and he returned it, his large hand moving in a gesture that was both farewell and promise. The walk back to Hatcheta took her nearly an hour, and with each step, she found her thoughts returning to Daniel Yates and the feel of his fingers brushing against hers, the way his muscles had moved beneath his shirt, the deep rumble of his voice making promises she wanted desperately to believe. She had come to New Mexico territory to escape one man's claim on her future, never expecting to meet someone who made her wonder what it might be like to choose her own path toward love. The boarding house was run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a kind woman in her 50s who asked few questions and offered generous portions at meals. When Olivia returned that evening, Mrs. Patterson was setting the table for supper. You have been gone all day, dear, the older woman said, her tone more concerned than reproachful. I was beginning to worry. I went for a walk in the woods beyond town, Olivia explained, hanging her shawl on the hook by the door. I lost track of time. Those woods can be dangerous, Mrs. Patterson warned. There are wild animals, and not all the men who wander through these parts are gentlemen. I encountered someone, actually, Olivia said, unable to keep the words from spilling out. A mountain man named Daniel Yates. Do you know him? Mrs. Patterson's face brightened immediately. Daniel. Oh yes, everyone knows Daniel. He brings meat and furs into town to trade, helps folks when they are in trouble. Last winter, he rescued the Johnsons' boy when the child got lost in a snowstorm. Nearly died himself from exposure, but he brought that boy back alive. He is a good man, one of the best I have known, though he keeps to himself mostly. Something warm bloomed in Olivia's chest at this confirmation of Daniel's character. He seemed kind. More than kind, Mrs. Patterson said, ladling stew into bowls. He is the sort of man who does what is right without expecting anything in return. Half the families in Hatcheta owe him their lives or their livelihoods in one way or another. If you met him, consider yourself fortunate. He does not take to many people. That night, lying in her narrow bed at the boarding house, Olivia could not stop thinking about the tree, the initials carved into its bark, and the promise that had been made. She traced her fingers over the calluses on her palm, remembering the brief contact of Daniel's skin against hers, and wondered what it would feel like to truly know him, to understand the man behind those honey-colored eyes. 3 days passed before she saw him again. She had taken to walking the streets of Hatcheta each morning, familiarizing herself with the small town that might become her new home if she could find work and a way to support herself. The town was barely more than a collection of buildings scattered across the desert landscape, with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a few other establishments serving the ranchers and miners who worked the surrounding territory. She was examining the notices posted outside the general store, hoping to find advertisements for employment, when a familiar deep voice spoke behind her. Looking for work. She spun around to find Daniel standing there, somehow even larger and more imposing than she remembered. Today, he wore a clean shirt that stretched across his broad chest, his muscular arms visible where he had rolled up the sleeves. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the strong line of his jaw and the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he looked at her. "I need to earn my keep," she said, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his proximity. "I have some money saved, but it will not last forever, and I refuse to return to Santa Fe. Can you read and write?" "Of course. My mother insisted I receive a proper education." Daniel nodded, seeming to consider something. "The school teacher here, Miss Abigail Henderson, has been asking for an assistant. The number of children in the area has grown, and she cannot manage them all alone. The pay is not much, but it comes with a small cabin behind the schoolhouse where the assistant can live." Hope flared in Olivia's chest. "That would be perfect. Do you think she would consider me?" "I can introduce you if you like," Daniel offered. "I was heading that way to drop off some books I picked up on my last trip to Las Cruces. The children like when I bring them reading material." The image of this massive mountain man carefully selecting books for children made something tender unfold inside her. "You are full of surprises, Daniel Yates." "I could say the same about you, Olivia Dalton," he replied, and there was warmth in his voice that made her skin tingle. "Come on. The schoolhouse is just down the road." They walked together through the dusty streets, and Olivia was acutely aware of the way people watched them, curiosity evident on their faces. Daniel seemed oblivious to the attention, or perhaps he was simply accustomed to it. She noticed how he adjusted his longer stride to match her shorter one, how he positioned himself on the outside, closest to the road, in an unconsciously protective gesture that made her feel both safe and cherished. The schoolhouse was a simple wooden structure with a bell tower, and behind it stood a small cabin that looked like it could use some repairs, but was otherwise sound. A woman in her early 30s emerged as they approached, her face lighting up when she saw Daniel. "Daniel." "What a wonderful surprise," she said. Then her gaze shifted to Olivia with open curiosity. "And you have brought a friend." Abigail, this is Olivia Dalton. She is new to Hachita and looking for work. I remembered you mentioning you needed an assistant." Abigail's eyes widened with interest. "Can you read and write, Miss Dalton?" "Yes, madam. I can also do figures and teach basic geography and history. My mother was very particular about education." "Oh, this is wonderful timing," Abigail said, clasping her hands together. "I have 32 students now, ranging from age 5 to 15, and I simply cannot give them all the attention they deserve. The position does not pay much, but you would have the cabin rent-free, and the families often provide food and other necessities in addition to the small salary." "Would you be interested?" "Very much so," Olivia said, unable to keep the enthusiasm from her voice. "Then consider yourself hired," Abigail declared. "You can move into the cabin as soon as you are ready. I will help you get it cleaned up and furnished. Oh, this is such a relief." "I have been praying for help." After discussing the details of her new position, Olivia and Daniel left the schoolhouse together. She felt like she was floating, the weight of uncertainty lifted from her shoulders. She had a job, a place to live, a chance to build a life on her own terms. "Thank you," she said to Daniel as they walked back toward the boarding house. "You did not have to help me, but you did, again." "I made you a promise," he said simply. "Besides, it benefits everyone. Abigail gets the help she needs, the children get better education, and you get to stay in Hachita. Seems like everyone wins." "Including you?" she asked, glancing up at him. He stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Especially me. I have been alone in these mountains for 8 years, Olivia. I have been content, or so I told myself. But seeing you standing by that tree, carving your claim to freedom, it woke something in me that I thought I had buried when I left Boston. The possibility of connection, of finding someone who understands what it means to choose your own path rather than follow the one laid out for you." Her breath caught. "Daniel, we barely know each other." "Then let us change that," he said, his voice gentle but determined. "Let me court you properly, Olivia. Let me show you what it could be like to build a life with someone who will never try to own you, who will only ever stand beside you as an equal." The word court seemed almost too civilized for this mountain man with his buckskins and wild freedom, but the sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. Olivia thought of Walter Hutchinson, the banker her father had chosen, with his cold eyes and possessive hands. Then she looked at Daniel, who had carved his initials beside hers not as a claim but as a promise of companionship, who had helped her find work without expecting anything in return, who stood before her now offering respect and partnership. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and sure. "Yes, I would like that very much." The smile that spread across Daniel's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his rugged features into something breathtaking. "Then I will call on you tomorrow evening if that is acceptable. I will bring supper and we can talk properly." "I will look forward to it," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. True to his word, Daniel arrived at her new cabin the following evening carrying a basket filled with fresh trout he had caught that morning, vegetables from his own garden, and even a jar of honey from wild bees. Olivia had spent the day moving her meager belongings from the boarding house and cleaning the cabin with Abigail's help. And now, as the sun set over the New Mexico landscape, she and Daniel sat on the small porch, cooking the fish over a fire and talking like they had known each other for years rather than days. "Tell me about Boston," she said, watching the way the firelight played across his strong features. "What made you leave?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, turning the fish carefully. "My father was a successful shipping merchant and I was his only son. From the time I was born, my life was planned out. The right schools, the right friends, the right career, the right marriage. Everything was about maintaining appearances and increasing wealth. I did what was expected for 20 years, but I felt like I was suffocating, like I was playing a role in someone else's story. He paused, his honey-colored eyes distant with memory. Then one day, I was walking through the harbor, surrounded by all these ships that traveled to distant places, and I just could not take it anymore. I walked onto a vessel heading west and never looked back. My father disowned me, said I was throwing away everything he had built. But out here in these mountains and deserts, I found something I never had back east. I found myself. Olivia understood that feeling more than she could express. My father was similar, though our circumstances were different. He runs a mercantile in Santa Fe, and to him, I was just another commodity to be traded for advantage. Walter Hutchinson promised him business connections and financial benefits. My feelings about the match were irrelevant. My mother tried to intervene, but she has no power in my father's house. "Do you miss her?" Daniel asked gently. "Terribly," Olivia admitted, surprised by the emotion that welled up. "She taught me to read, to think for myself, to believe I was worth more than whatever value men placed on me. She made me promise to run if I had to choose freedom over security. I think it broke her heart when I left, but she would have been more broken if I had stayed and married that man." Daniel reached over and took her hand, his large palm warm and calloused against her smaller one. "Perhaps someday, when you are settled and safe, you can send for her. Let her see that you made a good life for yourself." The idea had not occurred to Olivia, but now that he suggested it, hope bloomed bright and fierce in her chest. "Do you think that would be possible?" "Anything is possible out here," Daniel said. "That is the beauty and the terror of the frontier. You can be whoever you choose to be, build whatever life you want, but you have to fight for it every day." They talked long into the night, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. Olivia learned that Daniel had built his cabin with his own hands, that he preferred the company of animals to most people, that he read philosophy and poetry in the evenings by lamplight. He was nothing like what she had expected a mountain man to be, and everything she had not known she was looking for. As the weeks passed, Daniel courted her with a patience and thoughtfulness that made her fall harder with each passing day. He brought her wildflowers from the mountains, taught her to fish in the streams that carved through the desert landscape, showed her how to read the signs of coming weather in the clouds and the behavior of animals. In turn, she shared her love of books with him, reading aloud on quiet evenings while he carved wood into useful objects or mended his gear. The people of Hachita watched their growing relationship with approval and no small amount of curiosity. Mrs. Patterson told Olivia that she had never seen Daniel so attentive to anyone, that the way he looked at her was like she was the only person in the world. Abigail confided that the children had noticed a change in Daniel too, that he smiled more when he visited the school, that he seemed lighter somehow. But it was not all easy. 6 weeks after they met, a man arrived in Hachita asking questions about a young woman matching Olivia's description. Word reached her through the tight-knit community, and fear gripped her heart with icy fingers. Her father had sent someone to find her. Daniel arrived at her cabin within an hour of hearing the news, his face grim with determination. "Pack what you need," he said without preamble. "You are coming to stay at my cabin until this man leaves town." "I cannot run forever," Olivia said, though her hands were shaking. "Eventually my father will find me, or I will have to face him." "Not today," Daniel said firmly. His massive frame filled her doorway, all protective intensity. "Today you let me keep my promise. You are not alone in this, Olivia. Let me help you." She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she could handle this herself, but the truth was she was terrified. So she nodded and gathered her things, and within the hour, they were riding double on Daniel's horse up into the foothills toward his cabin. The journey took them higher into the mountains than Olivia had ventured before, the desert landscape giving way to scattered pines and rocky outcroppings. Daniel's cabin was nestled in a small valley, surrounded by towering trees and with a clear stream running nearby. It was larger than she had expected, well built and sturdy, with glass windows and a stone chimney. "You built all this yourself?" she asked, sliding down from the horse with his help. "Over the course of 3 years," he said, pride evident in his voice. "It is not fancy, but it is solid and warm in winter, cool in summer. I have books, enough food stored to last months, and the stream never runs dry. You will be safe here." Inside, the cabin was surprisingly cozy. There was a large main room with a fireplace, a kitchen area, and what looked like a bedroom sectioned off by a heavy curtain. Furs covered the floor and shelves lined one wall, packed with more books than Olivia had expected to find in a mountain cabin. Daniel's talent for woodworking was evident in the carefully crafted furniture and the small details throughout the space. "You can take the bed," Daniel said, gesturing to the curtained area. "I will sleep out here by the fire." "Daniel, this is your home. I cannot take your bed." "Yes, you can and you will," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You are my guest, and more than that, you are someone I care about deeply. I need to know you are comfortable and safe. Please, Olivia, let me do this for you." The intensity in his gaze made her relent. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." That night, lying in Daniel's bed surrounded by his scent of pine and wood smoke and something uniquely him, Olivia tried to calm her racing thoughts. She could hear him moving around in the main room, the crackle of the fire, the sounds of him settling down for the night. She felt safe here in a way she had not felt since leaving her mother's house, protected not by walls but by the strength and devotion of the man who slept just beyond the curtain. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Daniel continued his usual activities, checking his trap lines and hunting, but he never went far from the cabin, always ensuring Olivia was not alone for long. She helped with cooking and mending, read aloud from his books, and in the evenings they sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing. It was during one of these evenings, 4 days into her stay, that everything changed. They had been discussing philosophy, debating the nature of freedom and choice, when Daniel suddenly set down his cup and fixed her with an intense stare. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I have been trying to court you properly, to give you time and space to heal from what you ran from. But Olivia, I cannot keep pretending that what I feel for you is patient and civilized. From the moment I saw you carving your initials into that tree, I knew you were going to change my life. I have tried to be a gentleman, to take things slowly, but the truth is I am completely in love with you." Olivia's breath caught in her throat. "Daniel, wait, let me finish," he said, holding up a hand. His muscular chest rose and fell with the depth of his emotion. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know you came here running from a marriage you did not want. The last thing I want is to pressure you or make you feel trapped. But I need you to know that what I feel for you is real and true. I want to build a life with you, not because society says I should marry, not because you are a convenient option, but because I cannot imagine my days without you in them. You make me laugh, you challenge me, you see the world in ways that make me want to be better. I love you, Olivia Dalton, and if you will have me, I will spend the rest of my life proving it to you." Tears pricked Olivia's eyes, but they were tears of joy, of relief, of recognition. "I love you too," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I have been so afraid to admit it, afraid it was too fast, too soon, too much. But Daniel, When I am with you, I feel like I can finally breathe. You do not try to control me or change me. You stand beside me, not in front of me or behind me, but beside me as an equal. I love your strength and your gentleness, your passion for life and your quiet wisdom. I love the way you make me feel safe while still letting me be brave. I love you completely. Daniel crossed the space between them in 2 long strides, pulling her up from her chair and into his arms. He was so much larger than her, his muscular frame enveloping her completely, but his touch was infinitely gentle. He cupped her face in his large hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears on her cheeks, and then he kissed her. It was nothing like the few chaste kisses she had reluctantly allowed Walter Hutchinson. This was fire and promise, tenderness and passion, the meeting of 2 souls who had been searching without knowing what they sought until they found each other. His lips were warm and sure, and when she wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing closer to his solid strength, he made a sound low in his throat that sent shivers down her spine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not because you have to, not because you have no other choice, but because you want to, because you choose me the way I choose you. Marry me, Olivia." "Yes," she breathed, no hesitation in her response. "Yes, I will marry you, Daniel Yates. I choose you. I choose this life, this love, this future we can build together." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his arms tightening around her as if he would never let her go. When he lifted her off her feet, she laughed against his mouth, marveling at his strength and the ease with which he held her. He carried her to the chair by the fire and sat down with her in his lap, and they stayed like that for hours, kissing and talking and planning a future that felt as vast and full of possibility as the western sky. A week later, word came from town that the man looking for Olivia had left, apparently satisfied that she was not in Hachita. But Olivia did not return to her cabin behind the schoolhouse. Instead, she and Daniel rode into town together and announced their intention to marry. The ceremony took place 2 weeks later in the small church, with half the town in attendance. Abigail stood up with Olivia, and a rancher named Thomas Sheffield, one of Daniel's few close friends, stood with him. Olivia wore a simple dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her sew, and Daniel wore clean clothes with his hair tied back, looking both wild and civilized all at once. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Daniel kissed her with such tenderness and joy that several of the women in attendance dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. Afterward, there was a celebration in the town square with food and music, and Olivia danced with her new husband under the vast New Mexico sky, feeling like her heart might burst from happiness. That night, Daniel carried her over the threshold of his cabin, which was now their cabin, and made love to her with a passion and reverence that left her breathless and amazed. His strong hands explored her body with gentle intensity, his muscular frame covering hers as he whispered words of love against her skin. She had been nervous, knowing so little of what to expect, but Daniel was patient and attentive, making sure her pleasure matched his own. When they finally lay tangled together in the darkness, her head on his broad chest listening to the steady beat of his heart, Olivia felt like she had finally found where she belonged. The months that followed were the happiest of Olivia's life. She continued working as Abigail's assistant, loving the children and finding deep satisfaction in teaching. Daniel continued his life as a mountain man, but now he had someone to come home to, someone who made the solitude of the wilderness feel less lonely. They established routines together, splitting chores and responsibilities, learning each other's quirks and habits, building a partnership that strengthened with each passing day. In the spring of 1877, Olivia discovered she was pregnant. Daniel's reaction was one of pure joy tempered with concern for her well-being. He became even more protective than usual, though he tried to hide it, knowing she valued her independence. She found it endearing rather than suffocating because she understood it came from love, not a desire to control. "You are going to be an amazing father," she told him one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. "I hope so," he said, his large hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "I never had a good example. My father loved money and status more than he loved people, but I will love our child the way I love you, completely and without condition." Their son was born in December of that year during a cold snap that left frost on the windows of their cabin. The birth was long and difficult, attended by Mrs. Patterson, who had experience as a midwife, and there were moments when Daniel feared he might lose both Olivia and the baby. But Olivia was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and when the baby finally arrived, his lusty cries filling the cabin, Daniel wept openly with relief and joy. They named him Thomas, after Daniel's friend, and he had his mother's dark hair and his father's honey-colored eyes. Daniel held his son with hands that could fell trees and skin game, cradling the tiny infant with infinite care, and Olivia's heart swelled watching them together. "Look at what we made," Daniel whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Look at this perfect little person who exists because we found each other." As Thomas grew, the cabin echoed with new sounds. Baby laughter, the patter of small feet learning to walk, childish questions about everything from clouds to caterpillars. Daniel was patient with his son, teaching him about the natural world, showing him how to be both strong and gentle. Olivia watched them together, her mountain man and her boy, and felt grateful every day for the choice she had made to carve her initials into that tree. 2 years after Thomas was born, they welcomed a daughter they named Clara. She had her father's robust build and her mother's quick mind, and from the moment she could walk, she followed her father everywhere, insisting on helping with chores and learning everything he could teach her. Daniel doted on both his children, but there was something special about watching this massive mountain man let his tiny daughter braid wildflowers into his long hair or pretend to help him chop wood with a stick she insisted was her axe. When Thomas was 7 and Clara was 5, Olivia decided it was time to reach out to her mother. She wrote a long letter detailing her life, her marriage, her children, and her happiness. She explained that she had found freedom and love in New Mexico territory, and that she hoped her mother might consider visiting, or even staying if her father would allow it. The response came 3 months later, delivered by a stage driver who made the long journey from Santa Fe. Olivia's mother wrote that she was overjoyed to know her daughter was safe and happy, and that she would come for a visit in the spring. More surprisingly, she wrote that Olivia's father had suffered a change of heart after a serious illness the previous year. He had realized that his pursuit of wealth and status had cost him his only daughter, and he wished to make amends if Olivia would allow it. Olivia shared the letter with Daniel that evening, uncertain how to feel. "I do not know if I can forgive him," she admitted. "He was willing to sell me to a man I did not love for his own benefit." Daniel pulled her close, his strong arms a comfort and a refuge. "You do not have to decide right now, but people can change, Olivia. I know I am very different from the man I was in Boston. Maybe your father has truly learned something. At the very least, you should see your mother. You have missed her terribly." So in the spring of 1881, Olivia's parents came to visit. Her father was older, grayer, diminished by illness and regret. He wept when he met his grandchildren, and he apologized to Olivia with genuine remorse in his voice. It took time, but gradually, Olivia found she could forgive if not forget. Her mother, meanwhile, fell completely in love with the life her daughter had built. She adored Daniel, who treated her with the respect and kindness she had rarely received from her own husband, and she delighted in her grandchildren. Before they left to return to Santa Fe, Olivia's father pulled Daniel aside. Olivia watched from the porch as the two men talked, her father gesturing emphatically, Daniel listening with his usual calm intensity. When they returned, her father looked lighter somehow, and Daniel wore a small smile. "What was that about?" Olivia asked after her parents had departed. "He wanted to thank me for taking care of you, for giving you the life you deserve," Daniel said. "And he wanted my permission to start sending money to help with the children's education." "I hope you told him we do not need his money," Olivia said, a touch of her old defiance surfacing. "I told him we would accept it not because we need it, but because it gives him a way to show his love when words have failed him for so long," Daniel replied. "And because even though we are managing fine, having resources set aside for Thomas and Clara's futures is not a bad thing. But I made it clear that we are not beholden to him, that you made your own life through your own courage, and that any relationship we have with him going forward is on your terms." Olivia kissed him then, there on the porch of their cabin, grateful once again for this man who understood her so completely, who knew when she needed him to be her shield, and when she needed him to step back and let her fight her own battles. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and celebrations. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, fascinated by the wilderness and determined to learn everything about surviving in it. Clara was fierce and curious, excelling at her studies with Abigail and pestering her parents with endless questions about everything under the sun. They had one more child, another boy they named James, who came along when Thomas was 10 and Clara was 8. James was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing pictures of the landscape and the animals his father brought home. Daniel remained a presence in Hachita, helping neighbors, bringing in meat during hard times, teaching the children at the school about tracking and wilderness survival. But his favorite place was always home, his cabin in the foothills where his family gathered around the fire in the evenings, where Olivia still read aloud while he carved wood, where their children grew and thrived surrounded by love and the wild beauty of the territory. One evening in the summer of 1889, Daniel took Olivia's hand and led her away from the cabin, through the familiar woods to the cottonwood tree where they had first met 13 years earlier. The initials were still there, weathered but visible, O.D. and D.Y., carved side by side in the pale bark. "Do you remember what I promised you that day?" Daniel asked, his arm around her waist as they stood looking at the tree. "You promised I would not face anything alone while I was in this territory," Olivia said, leaning into his solid warmth. "And you have kept that promise every single day since." "I have another promise to make," he said, turning her to face him. Even after all these years, her heart still skipped when he looked at her with that intensity, when she saw the love shining clear and bright in his honey-colored eyes. "I promise to love you for the rest of my life, through whatever comes. I promise to stand beside you as we grow old together, as we watch our children build their own lives, as we face whatever challenges and joys the future brings. I promise to never take for granted the gift of having you as my wife, my partner, my best friend." Tears streamed down Olivia's face, but she was smiling. "I make you the same promise, Daniel Yates. You gave me freedom when I needed it most, but more than that, you gave me a love I could choose freely. You have been my strength, my joy, my home. I promise to love you always, through all our days, until we are old and gray and sitting on our porch watching our grandchildren play." He kissed her then, under the same tree where their story had begun, and it felt like coming full circle, like proof that sometimes the best things in life come from the choices we make when we are brave enough to declare our independence and open enough to accept help when it is offered with an honest heart. They walked back to the cabin hand in hand as the sun set, painting the New Mexico landscape in those familiar shades of orange and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney, and they could hear the children's voices through the open windows, Thomas reading to his younger siblings, Clara arguing about something with the passionate intensity she had inherited from both parents, James laughing at whatever story was being told. This was her life, Olivia thought, not the one that had been planned for her, but the one she had chosen. It had started with a moment of defiance, carving her initials into a tree as a declaration of freedom, and it had become so much more. It had become love and partnership, children and community, a life rich with meaning and connection. That night, after the children were asleep, Olivia and Daniel lay in their bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her, just as they had on their wedding night so many years before. His muscles had thickened with age and hard work. His hair now shot through with silver, but he was still her mountain man, still the man who had carved his initials beside hers and made a promise he had spent every day since keeping. "You ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Choosing this life with me instead of the solitude you had before?" "Never," he said without hesitation. "Olivia, before you I was alone. I told myself I preferred it that way, that I had found peace in the wilderness. But what I had was not peace. It was just absence of conflict. You brought me peace, the real kind, the kind that comes from being truly known and loved anyway. You brought me joy and purpose and a reason to be better than I was. How could I ever regret that?" She lifted her head to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into that simple gesture. "I feel the same way. You saved me, Daniel, in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. "That is what love does. It does not trap or diminish. It frees and expands. You taught me that." As the years continued to roll forward, their love only deepened. They faced challenges together. A severe drought that tested the whole community, Clara's rebellious teenage years that reminded them both of Olivia's flight from Santa Fe, Thomas's decision to join the territorial militia for a time, James's struggle to find his place in a world that valued physical strength over artistic sensitivity. Through it all, they remained each other's anchor and compass. When Olivia's mother passed away in 1893, Daniel held her while she grieved, taking on extra responsibilities so she could take the time she needed to heal. When Daniel broke his leg in a riding accident 2 years later, Olivia nursed him with patience and humor, refusing to let his frustration at being immobilized turn into bitterness. Their children grew into adults they were proud of. Thomas became a rancher, marrying a strong woman named Sarah and giving them 3 grandchildren who visited often. Clara surprised everyone by becoming a teacher like her mother had been, though she taught in Las Cruces and only came home for holidays and summers. James moved to Santa Fe to apprentice with an artist, finally finding others who shared his passion for capturing the beauty of the world on canvas. In the early spring of 1902, as Olivia and Daniel approached their mid-50s, they took a journey together back to that cottonwood tree. The walk was harder now, their bodies no longer as spry as they once were, but they made it, holding hands and stopping to rest when needed. The tree had grown over the decades, the trunk thicker, the branches reaching higher. But the initials were still there, stretched and faded but unmistakable. O.D. and D.Y. Proof that they had existed in that moment, that they had made a choice that changed everything. Daniel pulled out his knife, the same one he had used all those years ago, and carefully carved below their initials. 25 years together. Love eternal. Olivia added her own mark beneath his. My choice. My joy. My love. They stood there for a long time, leaning against each other, remembering and grateful. The girl who had run from an unwanted marriage and the man who had left behind a life that did not fit him had found each other in this unlikely place and built something beautiful together. Thank you, Olivia said quietly, for seeing me that day, for carving your initials beside mine, for keeping your promise. Thank you for letting me, Daniel replied, for trusting me, for choosing me, for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Olivia Yates. They returned to their cabin as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in familiar colors. Inside, the space was quiet without children's voices, but it was a comfortable quiet, full of the peaceful contentment that comes from a life well lived and love well given. That night, they sat on their porch in the rocking chairs Daniel had built years ago, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, and the creek that ran behind their property babbled its eternal song. Do you think our grandchildren will tell their children about us? Olivia asked. About how we met. I think they will tell a story about a woman brave enough to declare her independence and a man lucky enough to find her doing it, Daniel said, reaching over to take her hand. I think they will tell a love story that started with initials carved in a tree and a promise made by a mountain man who knew a treasure when he saw it. Olivia squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses earned through decades of hard work, the strength that had never wavered, the love that had only grown deeper with time. It is a good story, she said. It is the best story, Daniel agreed, because it is ours. They sat there long into the night, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would outlast them both. The initials on the tree would fade eventually, worn away by time and weather, but the legacy of their love would live on in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had been part of, in the countless small ways they had touched the lives of others. As they finally rose to go inside, Daniel pulled Olivia close one more time, his strong arms still her favorite place to be even after all these years. I love you, he said, the words as powerful now as they had been the first time he spoke them. I love you too, she replied. Today, tomorrow, and always. They walked into their cabin together, closing the door on another day, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring as they always had. Side by side, hand in hand, two souls who had carved their names beside each other and spent a lifetime proving that the best love stories are the ones we choose for ourselves. The years continued to bless them with good health and continued purpose. Daniel, even in his 60s, remained strong and capable, his muscles still defined though his movements were more measured. Olivia's mind stayed sharp, and she continued to read voraciously, often sharing interesting passages with Daniel in the evenings. Their love had settled into something both comfortable and exciting, the passion of youth transformed into something deeper and more enduring. In 1908, when Daniel was 60 and Olivia was 54, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. Their children organized a surprise party in Hachita, and it seemed like half the territory came out to celebrate. People shared stories of how Daniel and Olivia had helped them over the years. The family Daniel had pulled through a hard winter. The children Olivia had taught to read who had gone on to college. The couples who had looked to their marriage as an example of what love should be. Thomas stood and raised his glass. My parents taught me that love is not about possession or control. It is about partnership and respect. My father is the strongest man I know, but he never used that strength to dominate. Instead, he used it to protect and provide. And my mother, who ran from a man who wanted to own her, found a man who only ever wanted to stand beside her. That is the legacy they have given us. Clara spoke next, tears in her eyes. Mama, you taught me that a woman could be both soft and strong, that choosing love was not the same as surrendering freedom. Daddy, you showed me what a good man looks like, and you set an impossible standard for any man who might want to court me. This got a laugh, as Clara had famously turned down 3 marriage proposals, claiming none of the suitors measured up to her father. Even James, usually quiet in large gatherings, stood to speak. You gave me permission to be different, to value beauty and art in a place that often only valued physical strength and practical skills. You taught me that there are many ways to be brave, and that living authentically is its own kind of courage. As Olivia listened to her children speak, tears streaming down her face, she felt Daniel's hand find hers under the table, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. She looked at him and saw her own emotions reflected in his honey-colored eyes. Pride, love, gratitude, and a deep satisfaction that came from knowing they had done something right. Later that night, back in their cabin, Daniel surprised her with a gift. It was a wooden box he had carved himself, the lid decorated with an intricate design of a cottonwood tree with 2 sets of initials visible in its bark. Inside the box was a collection of small treasures from their years together. The ribbon she had worn in her hair the day they met, a dried wildflower from their wedding bouquet, Thomas's first baby tooth, a drawing James had made of the family when he was 6, a letter Clara had written them from Las Cruces, expressing her love and gratitude. You kept all of this? Olivia asked, amazed. I kept the things that mattered, Daniel said simply. The things that tell the story of us. She kissed him then, pouring decades of love into that kiss, and he responded with the same passion and tenderness he always had. Age had not diminished what they felt for each other. If anything, it had intensified it, adding layers of shared experience and deep knowledge that only time could provide. In the autumn of 1912, Daniel fell ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia, and for the first time in their marriage, Olivia faced the terrifying possibility that she might lose him. She nursed him day and night, refusing to leave his side, much as he had once promised never to leave hers. The children came home, gathering around their father's bedside, but it was Olivia's presence that seemed to keep him tethered to life. In his fevered dreams he called for her, and when she took his hand and spoke to him, he calmed. You cannot leave me yet, she whispered to him one night when his breathing was particularly labored. We have not finished our story. We promised each other we would grow old together, watch our grandchildren grow. You keep your promises, Daniel Yates. You always have. Whether it was her words, his own strength, or the power of their love, Daniel began to recover. It was slow, and he never quite regained all his former vigor, but by spring, he was well enough to sit on the porch again, to take short walks, to live with purpose if not quite the same physical capability. You brought me back, he told Olivia one evening. I could hear you calling me, telling me to stay. I wanted to listen, to come back to you. Always, she said, her hand in his. We come back to each other. That is what we do. As Daniel's strength gradually returned over the following months, they both understood that their time was becoming more precious. They had been blessed with long lives and good health, but they were mortal, and the years were catching up with them. Rather than fear this, they embraced each day with renewed appreciation. They made a point to visit the cottonwood tree every few months, a pilgrimage to the place where their story began. Each time, they added a small carving, marking the passage of years and the endurance of their love. The tree became a living chronicle of their relationship, its bark bearing witness to 3 decades and counting of devotion and partnership. In the spring of 1915, Clara returned home with surprising news. She had finally met someone who measured up to her father's standard. His name was Robert, a fellow teacher who shared her passion for education and her fierce independence. She wanted her parents to meet him before they made any decisions about their future. Daniel and Olivia welcomed Robert to their cabin, and over the course of a long weekend, they got to know the man who had captured their daughter's heart. He was thoughtful and respectful, strong in his convictions but willing to listen to others. Most importantly, the way he looked at Clara reminded them of how they looked at each other, with love, respect, and a kind of wonder that the other person existed. On Robert's last evening with them, Daniel took him for a walk, just as Olivia's father had once taken Daniel aside. When they returned, Robert's eyes were suspiciously bright, and Daniel wore an expression of satisfaction. "What did you tell him?" Clara asked her father later. "I told him what real love looks like," Daniel said. "I told him that his strength should never be used to control, but always to protect and support. I told him that marriage is not about 2 people becoming one, but about 2 whole people choosing to walk through life side by side. And I told him that if he ever makes you feel small or trapped, he will have to answer to me, old as I am." Clara laughed and hugged her father fiercely. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, Wildflower," he said, using the nickname he had given her as a child. "And I think Robert will be good for you. He reminds me of someone I used to know." "Who?" Clara asked. "Me, when I met your mother. Completely out of my depth but determined to be worthy of an extraordinary woman." The wedding took place that summer in Hachita, and it was a joyous celebration that brought together people from across the territory. As Olivia watched Daniel walk their daughter down the aisle, she thought back to her own wedding day, to the mountain man who had promised her freedom and partnership, who had spent every day since proving that love and independence were not opposing forces but complementary ones. During the reception, the band played a waltz, and Daniel led Olivia onto the dance floor. He moved more carefully now, his steps not quite as sure as they once were, but he held her with the same strength and tenderness that had characterized their entire relationship. "Do you remember dancing at our wedding?" he asked, his voice soft near her ear. "I remember everything about our wedding," she replied. "I remember thinking I had never been happier, never felt safer, never felt more seen. And somehow, impossibly, I love you even more now than I did that day." "That is the secret," Daniel said. "Love is not a finite resource that gets used up. It is a living thing that grows and changes and deepens if you tend it properly. We have been tending ours for 38 years, and it just keeps getting stronger." As they swayed together on the dance floor, surrounded by their children and grandchildren and friends, Olivia felt a profound sense of completion. Her life had not turned out anything like what had been planned for her in that mercantile in Santa Fe. It had turned out infinitely better, because she had been brave enough to run, and lucky enough to be found by a man who understood that the greatest gift you could give someone was the freedom to choose. The years 1916 and 1917 brought change to the territory and the nation. War broke out in Europe, and even in the remote mountains of New Mexico, its effects were felt. Thomas's eldest son enlisted despite his family's concerns, determined to serve. It was a tense time, marked by worry and prayer, but the boy returned safely in 1919, changed by what he had seen but intact. Through it all, Daniel and Olivia remained each other's constant. They were in their late 60s now, both showing the clear signs of age but still vital, still engaged with life and each other. Daniel's hair was completely silver, his face deeply lined by decades of sun and weather, but his honey-colored eyes still held that intensity that had captured Olivia's heart so long ago. Olivia's dark hair was streaked with white, her hands marked with age spots, but her mind was sharp, and her spirit as fierce as it had been when she carved her initials into that tree at 22. In the autumn of 1920, Daniel and Olivia celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them at the cabin. They had declined the children's offers to organize a celebration, preferring to spend the day in reflection and gratitude. They walked to the cottonwood tree one more time, moving slowly but steadily, supporting each other when the path was rough. The tree was magnificent now, towering and thick-trunked, its branches spreading wide. The initials they had carved in 1876 were high up now, stretched by the tree's growth, but still visible if you knew where to look. Daniel pulled out his knife, the blade worn thin by decades of use, and carefully carved new words into the bark at their current height. OD and DY. 43 years. Still choosing each other. They sat on the ground beneath the tree, something they would not have attempted even a few years earlier, knowing they might need help getting up but not caring. They leaned against each other, Daniel's arm around Olivia's shoulders, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, that steady rhythm that had been the soundtrack of her adult life. "You remember what I promised you that first day?" Daniel asked. "You promised I would not face anything alone," Olivia said, "and you have kept that promise every single day." "I need to make you another promise," he said, his voice serious. "We are getting old, my love. The time will come when one of us has to let the other go. I need you to promise me that if I go first, you will not give up. You will keep living, keep engaging with our children and grandchildren, keep finding joy in the world. Can you promise me that?" Tears stung Olivia's eyes, but she nodded. "Only if you promise me the same. Promise me that if I leave first, you will not retreat into the mountains and waste away. Promise me you will stay connected to the family we built, that you will let them care for you the way you have always cared for everyone else." "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Though I cannot imagine a world without you in it." "Nor I without you," she replied. "But we have been blessed, Daniel. 43 years together, 3 wonderful children, 7 grandchildren and counting, a community we have been part of and contributed to. Not many people get what we have had. So if the time comes when we have to say goodbye, we can do it knowing we did not waste a single day of the gift we were given." They sat there until the sun began to set, talking about their life together, remembering the moments both monumental and mundane that had woven together to create the tapestry of their love. Finally, as the air grew cool, they helped each other stand, their joints protesting but their spirits soaring, and they walked back to their cabin hand in hand, just as they had done thousands of times before. The winter of 1920 was mild, and both Daniel and Olivia weathered it well. Spring brought new life to the mountains, and with it, the news that Clara was expecting her first child. The joy of impending great-grandparenthood gave them both renewed energy and purpose. In late summer of 1921, as Daniel approached his 73rd birthday and Olivia her 67th, they made what would be their final trip to the cottonwood tree. They both knew, without discussing it explicitly, that this might be the last time they would be able to make the journey. The tree stood as majestic as ever, a living monument to their love. They traced their fingers over the carvings they had made through the years, each one a memory, a milestone, a reaffirmation of their commitment. Daniel carved one final message, his hand shaking slightly but his determination unwavering. To whoever finds this tree in years to come, love bravely, choose freely, stand together. That is the secret to a life well lived. As they stood there for the last time, Olivia thought about the frightened young woman she had been, running from a life she did not want, carving her initials as an act of defiance. She could never have imagined that a mountain man would step out of the shadows and carve his initials beside hers, or that this simple act would lead to decades of love, partnership, and joy. "Thank you," she whispered to Daniel, the words encompassing everything. "Thank you for seeing me, for choosing me, for standing beside me, for loving me so completely that I learned what it means to be truly free." "Thank you," he replied, and she knew he understood. "Thank you for trusting me, for building a life with me, for teaching me that love and freedom are not opposites but two parts of the same whole." They walked back to their cabin slowly, stopping often to rest and to appreciate the beauty of the landscape they had called home for so long. The mountains rose in the distance, eternal and unchanging. The sky stretched vast and blue above them, and between them, hand in hand, flowed the love that had sustained them through more than 4 decades. Daniel passed away peacefully in his sleep in the early spring of 1922, just a few months shy of his 74th birthday. He went to bed one night after a quiet evening with Olivia, kissed her good night as he had done thousands of times before, and simply did not wake up. Olivia, lying beside him as she had for 44 years, knew the moment his spirit left, felt the absence like a physical thing. She kept her promise. Though her heart was shattered, though the pain of his loss was nearly unbearable, she did not give up. She stayed engaged with her children and grandchildren, attended Clara's baby shower, and rejoiced at the birth of her first great-grandchild, a boy they named Daniel in honor of his great-grandfather. She wrote letters, sharing stories of Daniel with anyone who wanted to hear them, ensuring that his legacy lived on not just in the memories of those who knew him, but in the written word. She compiled these stories into a journal, adding her own recollections of their life together, creating a chronicle of their love for future generations. But the truth was, a part of her had gone with him. She missed him in ways both large and small. The sound of his voice, the warmth of his hand in hers, the way he looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. She missed their conversations, their shared silences, the life they had built together in their cabin in the mountains. She lived for one more year after Daniel's death, filling that time with as much love and purpose as she could muster. She saw Clara's baby boy grow strong and healthy, watched Thomas's youngest daughter get married, helped James plan an art exhibition in Santa Fe. She poured everything she had left into these connections, these relationships that were the living legacy of her marriage to Daniel. On a warm spring morning in 1923, Olivia asked her grandson Thomas Jr. to take her to the cottonwood tree one last time. He helped her make the journey, supporting her when the path was difficult, patient with her slow pace. When they reached the tree, she ran her hands over the carved initials, tracing OD and DY with fingers that trembled with age and emotion. "This is where it all began," she told her grandson. "This is where I met your great-grandfather, where he carved his initials beside mine and promised I would never face anything alone. And he kept that promise, Thomas. For 44 years, he kept that promise. Now I get to go to him, and we will be together again." "Grandma, you are scaring me," Thomas Jr. said, concern evident in his voice. "Do not be scared," she said gently. "I have lived a full and beautiful life. I have loved deeply and been loved in return. I have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carry forward the best of me and your great-grandfather. That is not something to fear. That is something to celebrate." She asked Thomas Jr. to help her sit at the base of the tree, and there she rested, her hand on the bark where Daniel had carved his initials so long ago. She told her grandson stories of their life together, painting pictures with words of the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and challenge. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in those familiar shades of orange and gold, Olivia felt a profound sense of peace. She had kept her promise to Daniel. She had lived fully even after losing him, had stayed connected to their family, had found moments of joy even in grief. And now, finally, she felt him calling her home. Thomas Jr. helped her back to the cabin as darkness fell, worried about her but understanding somehow that this day had been important. He made sure she was comfortable, built up the fire, made her tea. She thanked him for his kindness and told him to go home to his own family, that she would be fine. After he left, Olivia sat in the rocking chair Daniel had made for her decades ago, wrapped in the quilt they had shared for years. She looked around the cabin, seeing the life they had built together in every corner. The shelves of books, the carved furniture, the photographs of their children and grandchildren, the small treasures that told the story of their days. She closed her eyes and let herself remember. Daniel stepping out of the forest shadows that first day, the way her heart had recognized him even before her mind understood. The feel of his hand taking hers, carving his initials beside hers. His proposal, offered not as a claim but as an invitation to build something together. Their wedding, their children, the thousand small moments of connection and understanding that had woven together to create a love story for the ages. "I am coming, my love," she whispered into the quiet cabin. "Wait for me just a little longer." Olivia Dalton Yates passed away that night, sitting in her rocking chair, a slight smile on her face, as if she had seen something beautiful just before she let go. When her children found her the next morning, they wept, but they also understood that she had gotten exactly what she wanted: to return to the man who had been her partner, her love, her home. They buried her beside Daniel in the small cemetery in Hachita, under a sky as vast and blue as the one they had lived under for so many years. The headstone was simple: Daniel Yates and Olivia Dalton Yates. They chose each other, they stood together, they loved bravely. The cottonwood tree remains standing to this day, now more than 150 years old. The initials carved into its bark have faded, stretched by growth and worn by weather, but on certain days when the light hits just right, you can still make them out. O.D. and D.Y. Proof that two souls met in the wilderness of New Mexico Territory in 1876 and chose to build a life together. Their descendants still live in the area, carrying forward the legacy of love and partnership that Daniel and Olivia established. The cabin in the foothills has been preserved as a family treasure, passed down through generations, a place where their children and great-grandchildren come to remember and to feel connected to the remarkable love story that started their line. The journal Olivia kept, chronicling their life together, has been published and shared widely, inspiring countless people with its message of love, freedom, and partnership. It serves as a reminder that the best love stories are not about possession or control, but about two people choosing each other every day, standing beside each other through whatever life brings, and building something beautiful together. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light is fading and the mountains cast long shadows, people swear they can feel the presence of Daniel and Olivia in these hills, their love so strong that it left an imprint on the very landscape. Whether this is truth or legend, it speaks to the power of what they created together, a love so profound that it transcended their mortal lives and became something eternal. Their story began with a simple act: a woman carving her initials into a tree as a declaration of independence, and a man carving his beside hers as a promise of partnership. From that moment grew a love that lasted 44 years in life and continues still in memory and legacy. A testament to the power of choosing love, of standing together, of being brave enough to carve your name beside someone else's and make it mean forever.